Verstappen did not just lose a race in Monaco. He turned one of Formula One's most glamorous weekends into a warning shot against the entire 2026 rulebook. A four-time world champion started on the front row, ready to fight back against Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes dominance, and then his Red Bull failed before turn 1. Anti-stall. No launch. No power. A furious radio message. And a championship gap exploding to 113 points. But the scariest part was not Verstappen's failure. It was what happened around him. Lando Norris suffered another power unit-related retirement. Monaco was ripped apart by a safety car, a red flag, and a wave of penalties. Drivers were already furious about super clipping, sudden power loss, battery management, and cars that no longer feel like true Formula One machines. And now Verstappen is no longer just complaining. He is becoming the face of a driver revolt. Because if the new rules were supposed to make Formula One cleaner, closer, and more exciting, then Monaco exposed the brutal question nobody can ignore. Did the sport accidentally build a future that even its best drivers do not trust? Subscribe to the channel. Monaco did not create the driver revolt. It exposed it. The frustration had been building for months, quietly at first, then louder every time the new Formula One cars did something that felt strange, unsafe, or impossible to explain in a way that made sense to ordinary fans. And Verstappen was the one who said it with the least patience. These cars did not feel right. Not just slow. Not just difficult. Not just different. Wrong. That is a dangerous word in Formula One, because the sport is built on change. Every few years, the rules shift, the cars evolve, the strongest team is challenged, and everyone is told to adapt. Drivers are expected to accept that. Engineers are expected to solve it. Fans are expected to learn the new language of the sport. But 2026 was not a normal rule change. It touched the soul of the car. The new regulations changed how the power was delivered. They changed the balance between the combustion engine and electrical energy. They made battery management more important than ever. They introduced a version of racing where the driver could be flat on the throttle, asking for full power, while the car was forced to harvest energy and slow down. That is the part that made drivers angry. Because from the cockpit, this was not just a clever technical system. It was a loss of trust. Imagine fighting another driver down a straight, your foot planted, your mind already preparing for the braking zone, and suddenly your car begins to fade because the battery needs to recover. You are still asking for speed. Your rival may still have full power. The gap between you changes instantly. That is not a normal overtake. That is not a normal mistake. That is the car deciding, in the middle of a fight, that it has another priority. And for drivers, that is terrifying. Formula One cars are supposed to be extreme. They are supposed to demand bravery. They are supposed to punish hesitation. But the best drivers can accept danger when the danger is honest. They can accept oversteer if they feel it coming. They can accept a hard braking zone if the car responds consistently. They can accept tire degradation if the decline is predictable. What they struggle to accept is unpredictability created by systems they cannot feel clearly enough. That is why super clipping became the phrase hanging over the new era. It sounds technical, almost harmless, but the reality is simple. The battery needs energy, so the car takes power away from driving the rear wheels and uses it to recharge. Under the original concerns, the power difference between a charged car and a depleted car could be enormous. Enough to make cars on the same straight behave like they belong to different categories for a few seconds. And a few seconds in Formula One can be the difference between a controlled battle and a near accident. This is where Verstappen's complaints stopped sounding like selfish frustration. Because he was not only saying Red Bull had built a difficult car. He was saying the rules had created a kind of racing that did not feel natural, and possibly did not feel safe. That matters. When a champion complains about performance, rivals can dismiss it. When a champion complains about the identity and safety of the cars, the sport has to listen. And Verstappen was not alone. Lewis Hamilton raised concerns that the new format could become hard for fans to understand. That point is bigger than it sounds. Formula One can be complex, but the fight must feel clear. A fan should know why a driver is attacking, why another is defending, and why a car suddenly loses momentum. If the answer is hidden inside energy states, software behavior, battery recovery, and system limits, then the emotion of the battle becomes harder to follow. Lando Norris also became part of the pressure. He was deeply critical of how the new cars felt, and his own reliability problems gave weight to the argument. It is one thing for a driver to complain after finishing fourth. It is another when power unit issues are ending races and proving that the concerns are not just theoretical. That is how a complaint becomes a movement. One driver speaks. Another agrees. A third suffers the exact type of problem people feared. Then the governing body has to respond. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile and Formula One management could not ignore the noise. Stefano Domenicali met with Verstappen. Nicolas Tambatsis acknowledged that changes might be needed. The sport asked for real race data, but the message from the drivers was already sharp. They did not want to wait until something worse happened. That is when the emergency response began. The first major fix came through software and calibration changes, not a full redesign. That was important because no one wanted to throw away the entire regulation era before it had even settled. The sport tried to adjust the worst symptoms without admitting the whole concept was broken. The battery energy allowance was reduced so cars did not need to harvest as aggressively. The peak harvest power was changed so energy recovery could happen more quickly and for shorter periods. Race boost was capped to reduce sudden speed differences. Energy deployment was smoothed. A low-power start detection system was introduced to spot cars that accelerated abnormally slowly after clutch release. The formation lap energy counter was reset to correct an inconsistency. On paper, that sounded like control. It sounded like the system was listening. But Formula One does not prove a rule fix on paper. It proves it at the start line. And Monaco became the worst possible test. Because Monaco is not just a race. It is a magnifying glass. Every mistake looks bigger there. Every hesitation becomes dangerous. Every mechanical failure feels public, humiliating, and permanent. Verstappen started on the front row. That alone gave the weekend enormous weight. Red Bull had been struggling. The championship was running away from them. Mercedes had found something with Antonelli that made the rest of the grid nervous. Ferrari had Hamilton and Leclerc pushing strongly. McLaren were close enough to matter. For Red Bull, Monaco was not a luxury race. It was a chance to stop the bleeding. A clean start could have changed everything. Track position in Monaco is almost priceless. Once a driver gets through the opening corners near the front, he can shape the race even if his car is not perfect. He can defend. He can force strategy. He can turn the circuit itself into protection. But Verstappen never got that chance. The car failed to launch properly. Anti-stall triggered. The field rushed past. And the driver who had spent months warning about the new era was stranded in the most visible place in Formula One. That image did more damage than any press conference ever could. Because it showed the problem in a way everyone could understand. No need for charts. No need for equations. No need for a technical deep dive into hybrid deployment. A champion was ready to race. His car said no. That is why the revolt gained power after Monaco. It was not because every detail of Verstappen's failure could be blamed directly on the rules. That would be too simple and too careless. Red Bull had its own technical problems. The exact cause of the failure belonged to the team's investigation. A complex power unit issue can come from many places. But symbolically, it landed perfectly inside the wider argument. The drivers had warned that the cars were too dependent on strange systems. Then one of the loudest critics could not even get away cleanly. The sport had introduced a low-power start detection system to reduce start-related problems. Then Verstappen's race died at the start. The new era was supposed to be advanced. Then Monaco made it look fragile. That is the power of timing. And Monaco kept adding fuel. Lando Norris retired again with a power unit-related issue. That mattered because Norris was not a distant voice in this debate. He had also criticized the new cars. His failure made the revolt feel broader. It was no longer just Verstappen versus the rulebook. It was multiple drivers, multiple teams, multiple symptoms. Then the race itself descended into disorder. A safety car after Lance Stroll's crash. A red flag after Charles Leclerc hit the same area. Multiple pit lane speeding penalties. George Russell receiving a drive-through penalty after failing to serve a previous punishment correctly. Teams and drivers under pressure. The race broken apart, restarted, reshaped, and judged through penalties and procedures. And through all of it, Antonelli won again. That detail matters because every revolt needs a contrast. For Verstappen and Red Bull, 2026 looked like chaos, frustration, and technical pain. For Mercedes and Antonelli, it looked like mastery. The same rules that made Verstappen furious were helping create a new dominant force. That does not mean the rules were unfair. It means they were decisive. Mercedes understood the new language faster. Red Bull did not. And Antonelli became the face of the era Verstappen was resisting. That made the politics even more intense. Because when a driver complains about rules while losing, people can accuse him of bitterness. But when the complaints are shared across the grid and connected to safety, drivability, fan clarity, and reliability, they become harder to dismiss. That is why Verstappen's position was so powerful. He had competitive pain, yes. But he also had a bigger argument. The new cars may be too artificial in how they deliver performance. They may create speed differences that feel unsafe. They may make racing harder for fans to understand. They may place too much emphasis on energy management and not enough on pure attack. They may be modern in theory, but less convincing in the hands of the drivers. That is a serious accusation. Because Formula One has always balanced two identities. It is a technology championship, and it is a driver championship. The technology must be extreme, but the driver must still matter in a way the audience can feel. The cars must evolve, but the racing cannot become so hidden behind systems that the human contest disappears. This is the line Verstappen seemed to be defending. Not nostalgia. Not fear of change. The idea that Formula One should still feel like Formula One. Fast. Violent. Clear. Dangerous in an honest way. A sport where a driver attacks because he trusts the machine beneath him, not because software has temporarily given him permission. That is why his language cut through. He was not asking for easy cars. No driver at that level wants easy cars. He was asking for cars that make sense at the limit. There is a difference. An easy car is forgiving. A good Formula One car is honest. It can still be brutal. It can still punish mistakes. It can still demand courage. But when the driver reaches the edge should not move unpredictably because of an invisible energy state. And Monaco made that philosophical debate feel urgent. Because when the car stopped, Verstappen's championship position became almost absurd. 113 points behind Antonelli. Red Bull fourth in the constructors' standings. A team that had once crushed the field now trying to explain why its champion could not even start the race properly. That is how revolts grow. They need pressure. They need evidence. They need a leader. They need a moment that turns private frustration into public force. Monaco gave them all four. The pressure was the championship gap. The evidence was the chaotic race and mechanical failures. The leader was Verstappen. The moment was the front row car dying before turn 1. And now the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile faces the problem every rule maker fears. They already changed the rules once. But the drivers may demand more. That creates a political trap. If the governing body changes too much, it looks like the original 2026 concept was flawed. Manufacturers who invested heavily in the new formula may not like that. Teams that adapted well, especially Mercedes, may resist anything that reduces their advantage. New entrants came in partly because of these regulations, and they need stability. But if the governing body changes too little, the driver revolt grows. Every new failure becomes evidence. Every strange straight-line slowdown becomes a safety concern. Every fan confused by power loss becomes a criticism of the product. Every Verstappen comment becomes another headline. That is the impossible balance now. Protect the future of Formula One, without ignoring the people who have to drive it. And the drivers have one argument that engineers cannot fully defeat. They are inside the cars. A simulation can predict a speed differential. A spreadsheet can calculate energy recovery. A regulation can describe the system. But only the driver knows how it feels when the car suddenly stops giving what he expects, while another car closes behind at racing speed. That human data matters. And after Monaco, it became impossible to keep it quiet. Verstappen may be the face of the revolt, but the deeper issue belongs to the entire grid. Because even teams that are winning have to ask whether the racing product is right. Mercedes may enjoy the advantage now, but if fans lose trust in the racing, or if drivers keep warning that the cars feel wrong, the whole sport pays the price. That is why Hamilton's point about fan understanding matters so much. A sport can be complicated behind the scenes, but simple in its drama. The fastest driver. The best attack. The bravest defense. The smartest strategy. But when cars suddenly gain or lose huge amounts of power because of invisible energy conditions, the drama becomes harder to read. A fan sees one car slow and another fly past. Is that skill? Strategy? Battery state? A failure? A rule? A software mode? If the audience has to decode the race instead of feeling it, Formula One loses something precious. And drivers feel that too. They know when a move feels earned. They know when a battle feels artificial. They know when a car has become too managed. That is why the revolt is not only about safety, or only about performance, or only about Red Bull's struggles.